Okay, I really shouldn't have to open this video with a disclaimer, but there are certain pockets of the Eurovision fandom who are kind of crazy about this sort of thing, so I do need to address it. This video discusses the Eurovision history of a country commonly known as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Not every country likes them using that name, but that's how they're known internationally at the time of recording, so that's the name I'm going to use, and I don't want to hear anything about it, okay? I really don't care about the politics of the situation, I just want to talk about music, okay? So, just live and let live. Is that really too much to ask? Hello everyone, I am Tessellating Hexagons, and today I'd rather like to talk to you lovely people about a certain former Yugoslav republic who have really been underperforming at Eurovision lately, and by lately I actually mean for the last 20 years ever since their debut as an independent nation. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure why, but the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia just seems to be the Adriatic region's Eurovision punching bag, and for the quality of song they consistently put in, that really isn't all that fair. But before we dive into the specifics of that, let's make sure we're all on the same page to begin with by way of those fast facts I seem to love divulging so much. First up, their national broadcaster is Makedonska Radio Televizija, or MRT for short, or MKRTV for medium. It's one of those broadcasters who can't seem to settle on one standard abbreviation, as far as I know. Maybe they can and it's just the fandom that can't pick which one they like more. I don't know, but that's their broadcaster. Anyway, at present, their head of delegation is one Mary Popova, and I specify at present here because, well, because of the obvious. Strictly speaking, the Republic made its debut as part of Yugoslavia, who first appeared at the contest in 1961, and presumably they would have had their own head of delegation for that, but right. Here's the thing, I'll elaborate on this in just a moment, but none of Yugoslavia's entries ever came from the Macedonian broadcaster. They were basically just along for the ride and that's it. So their actual debut wouldn't come until 1996 with Calliope Buccal, who would later go on to represent her country again in 2012 and 2016. Her first entry, though, was entitled Samo Ti, meaning Only You, but it was eliminated in the audio-only jury-led pre-qualifying round of that year's contest, finishing joint 26th out of 29. And if you remember the video I did about Slovakia's Eurovision history, you'll know that 22nd place was the cutoff point in that. So they missed the 1996 contest, meaning that the whole lowest average scores get the boot rule of 1997 prevented them from actually putting in a proper appearance at the contest until 1998, with Vlado Janevski's Ne Zori Zoro, meaning Do Not Rise, Dawn, although some people translate it instead as Dawn Do Not Rise, but I mean, clearly that's not where the verb is, whatever, that's the meaning of the title one way or the other. And much like with Slovakia's failure to pass Kwalifikacja za Mill Street in 1994, FYR Macedonia's failure to pass the pre-qualifying round in 1996 means that, on official records, the EBU considers 1998 to be the country's actual genuine and true debut. I still don't particularly care for the EBU officially regarding the pre-qualifying rounds of 1993 and 96 as multinational national finals, as opposed to the legitimate semi-finals that they may as well have been, but that is all in the past now. What can you do? That aside, in the present day, their best score to date came in 2006 in the form of Elena Risteska's relatively flirtatious pop song Nina Nina. She placed 12th at the end of the voting with 56 points, which, even bearing in mind that that was under the version of the 12-point system before the public and juries voted separately, is highly surprising. In fact, the highest score a Macedonian entry has ever achieved is in 2007, where Karolina Goceva scored 73 points in the final, after gaining 97 in the semi-final, tying with 2005 for the joint highest semi-final score from a Macedonian entrant. That's right, they've never ever broken into 3 digits to date, unless you count the 111 points they got in the junior contest of 2007, but that was still only once. Now, I'll quite happily be the first to say that they don't deserve the terrible luck they've been living with for the past 20 years. Granted, if you poke around under the surface, you'll find that their time at the contest isn't quite as awful as it looks at a glance, but then again, with 2012 as the sole exception, the country has been on a non-stop non-qualification streak since their first hiccup in 2008, and even if there are technicalities to that, that raw fact by itself just sounds discouraging. So it's going to take some work to defend the country's reputation, but I'll do that quite gladly, they deserve it. So, over the course of this video, I'll be looking at the groundwork that forms the history of the Republic, as far as Eurovision is concerned anyway, because I'm really not a geopolitical historian, then what it looks like when a Macedonian entry goes well, and what's changed and why things seem so different in the here and now. And who knows, maybe I'll find a pattern in there. And yes, I did find a pattern in there. And I do want to reiterate, while their luck has soured over recent years, it isn't as bad as it looks. For one, despite their 10 failures to qualify in the 21st century, they haven't once finished in last place in their respective semi-finals. I grant you there were a couple of close shaves where they came second last, but they have never failed outright. More than that, in 2008 and 2009, they placed 10th in their semi-final, which ordinarily would qualify them for the final, boosting their success rate by 2 whole years. However, 2008 and 2009 were the first 2 years to incorporate having more than one semi-final, and much like with the semi-final round in the first place, the EBU had a few teething troubles in figuring out how to make that actually work. Between 2004 and 2007, there was one semi-final, from which 10 countries qualified alongside 14 auto-qualifiers. The host country, the Big Four, that is, the UK, Germany, France and Spain, since Italy didn't come back to the contest until 2011, and the 9 highest-placing countries from the previous year's scoreboard that didn't meet those other criteria. From 2010 onwards, meanwhile, there were 2 semi-finals yielding 10 qualifiers each, for a total of 20, joining the Big Five and the host country to make a final of 26. For some reason, that hyper-obvious system didn't occur to them for that 2-year interim that's still left unaccounted for, though. While 10 countries did still qualify from both semi-finals, so 20 altogether, the higher-ups, for whatever reason, thought that it made more sense to give those tickets to the semi-final to the top 9 countries on the scoreboard, and then pick one of the remaining semi-finalists in each show more or less at random with the help of a jury. And so that's how the Macedonian entry was snubbed 2 years in a row, despite coming 10th, in favour of Sweden's 12th place in 2008 and Finland's 12th place in 2009. And by the time the system was fixed to be fairer, it was too late. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So let's begin with the history of the Republic's previous incarnation, Yugoslavia. Granted, I'm not an expert in the field by any stretch of the imagination, but the countries of modern-day former Yugoslavia must, most likely, have held strong cultural identities even before the separation, because from their Eurovision debut in 1961, Yugoslavia used a special kind of national final format, where each of the 8 federal units would submit a candidate entry, and then one would ultimately be picked to go on to represent Yugoslavia at Eurovision itself. That's the reason, for instance, that Yugoslavia's victory in 1989 is most commonly attributed to Croatia, because the band, Riva, were Croatia's candidate in the selection process. I'm sure you can predict the problem with this, though. Of the 8 competing federal units, only 5 of them ever successfully fielded entries to Eurovision. Serbia was represented 6 times, Croatia was represented 12 times, although one of those 12 was withdrawn before the contest happened, Bosnia and Herzegovina and Slovenia were represented 4 times each, and even Montenegro got 2 entries in. However, this left Kosovo, Vojvodina, and, crucially for this discussion, Macedonia out in the cold. To put it in especially brutal terms, on those grounds, perhaps their present-day post-independence bad luck shouldn't come as much of a surprise. After all, if even their own fellow Yugoslavians wouldn't put them through to the contest, why would anyone from further afield give them any special attention at all? And, in fact, that does seem to be reflected in the fact that, outside of Junior Eurovision, FYR Macedonia has never broken 100 points, nor even placed in the top 10 of any given year, even under the most recent voting system. In my professional opinion, though, it is not that straightforward, so don't even worry about it. I mean, unpack that point of view for a second. It isn't that the federal unit of Macedonia failed at Eurovisia, the national final process. Nobody voted against them. Rather, they simply lost out to a more preferred candidate every single year. Nobody was conspiring to block their representation at the contest any more than they were doing so with Kosovo or Vojvodina. That is to say, they weren't conspiring against them at all. There is no conspiracy here. Once you understand that, the idea of nobody liked them then, so nobody likes them now, falls apart entirely. The truth of the matter is, now that FYR Macedonia has the autonomy to represent themselves at Eurovision, it just so happens that some of their choices haven't hit home with the voting public or juries, and in kind of the same way. Remember, they may never have been in the top 10, but they've also never come last. No one's ever voted against them, they've just been overlooked in favour of more popular entries. That being said, If we look at what the Republic has going for them, as evidenced by what they've sent in the past that has worked, and cross-reference that with the years where things haven't gone quite so well, we should, in theory, come back with a relatively clear picture of the playing field, and of whether or not Eurovision is worth the time of day to them. And, spoiler alert, it is. So, where do we begin with that? I propose that we start with the positives. After all, after so many disheartening results at the contest, I'm sure the average member of the Macedonian delegation would be convinced that there aren't any positives to speak of whatsoever. But we already know that that isn't true. There's no hidden agenda to try and restrict the number of points they get, and there's no international conspiracy to denounce anything they send as being inherently bad. In all truth, FYR Macedonia is one of those Eurovision countries that I genuinely admire for their resourcefulness, truly. Every year, especially in recent memory, they have always brought something different to the table. Every year, there's always been a song that stood out as distinctively the Macedonian entry. Without a shadow of a doubt, they have originality, creativity, and variety on their side. As proof of that, let's just look at the last 5 years, and for convenience's sake, let's ignore that none of them did remarkably well to an extent. In those 5 years, we had a modern dance pop song, an emotional anthem ballad with R&B influences, a Balkan rockish ballad, a melancholic pop number in the style of Tove Lo, and whatever IQ's entry was in 2018, a bizarre confluence of pop and reggae. And this is saying nothing of the entries preceding those too. Throughout the Republic's history at the contest, there's been a crazy amount of variety, including a fusion of Western pop and Romany influences, rock ballads with and without rap lyrics, sexy pop, solo artists, duos, groups, and more. They tried singing in English, they tried singing in Macedonian, they tried using both, they tried branching out. It really does seem like nothing is off the cards when it comes to the country considering its act for any given year. Truly, the Macedonian entries have always been ones to watch out for in that regard. And as far as Eurovision is concerned, just being that memorable and anticipatable is a victory in itself. As Oscar Wilde said, the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about. And in spite of everything, every year the Macedonian entry is one that always gets a reaction in my experience. So it really is just the results that they're not doing right, or so it would seem. But before we dive into the specifics of what's holding them back, we still have yet to look at the Macedonian metagame, so to speak. It's one thing praising them on their variety of entries and all the bells and whistles that follow with that, but there is also the question of aftercare, so to speak. The question of how the delegation handles every aspect of Eurovision that isn't the competition itself. And honestly, they're pretty good with it, actually. But I wouldn't be talking about it at this point in the video if that weren't the case, right? I have two very specific things in mind when I say this, too. First of all, there's a surprisingly active fan scene for the Macedonian delegation, predominantly taking the form of @ESC_Macedonia on Twitter. This account leaves nothing to ambiguity in its admission that it's entirely run by fans, but still strives to support its country at the contest. Most recently, that has involved asking for input on what could have been done to improve the country's performance at the 2018 contest, with a view to compiling the data and sending it directly to the head of delegation. And if that's not passion and dedication, I don't know what is. And if a country can encourage that sort of fan interaction to thrive at all, much less to feed back and be of active, positive use to the delegation proper, then that country is winning at the Eurovision metagame. The other example that comes to mind when thinking about how the delegation approaches its job is a poll they ran about 3 years ago regarding what they should do about their stance on Eurovision. They put the poll online and accepted votes from within FYR Macedonia and separately from international viewers too, just to see what the general sentiment was. And the poll itself consisted of 3 options. 1. We should select our next Eurovision entrant internally. 2. We should use Skopje-Fest to determine our next Eurovision entrant. 3. We should withdraw from Eurovision. Now, I admit, I don't have graphics or data on the outcome of this poll to hand, and I have tried looking it up, but none of it's been forthcoming, so you'll have to trust me on this part. But, as I recall, the most popular response by far on that poll was actually that third option. Most people wanted MKRTV to just give up on the contest. But what I admire about the delegation is that they didn't just give a knee-jerk reaction to seeing that as the most popular response, they actually took time to analyse the data. As I said, I don't have the actual numbers to hand, but let's say the results looked something like this. It's not 100% true to life, but it's the proportions that are important here. Namely, the "we should withdraw" option won the poll with somewhere around 40% of the vote. So that would initially seem like the will of the people, but the delegation read between the lines. Remember, option 3 was the only one that spoke of withdrawing from the contest. Options 1 and 2 were all about persevering, so that means that even though their thoughts on exactly how to persevere were split between two different responses, the fact remains that at least 60% of the votes were for persisting in the contest. And so that's what the delegation did. And that's admirable. The last time FYR Macedonia didn't participate in Eurovision was 2003, and that was only due to being relegated off the back of their poor result in 2002. That was it. Their only other absences in 97, 99 and 2001 were all for the same reason. The Macedonian delegation has never been absent by choice. They have never chosen to give up. And that determination really does merit recognition. All the pieces are there for the country to really gain traction at the contest. So what's been going wrong for them then? Honestly, it does just seem like a lot of little things combined with a sizable dose of bad luck. As we've established, it's not as if the delegation doesn't know what they're doing with their variety of acts that they send and how they carry themselves as a team. Rather, it's minor hurdles that they trip over every year that seems to impact their results. Let's take a look at the last 5 years, for instance, and see what sort of thing the Macedonian team has been playing with and why each one might not have qualified. First up, Tijana Dapčević's To the Sky. In theory, this was a fun, modern pop song under the working title of Pobjeda, meaning victory. But what we got in practice on stage in Copenhagen was a set of beautifully striking imagery paired with struggling vocals and utterly chaotic choreography that detracted from its impact in a big way. Still, it took 13th place at the close of the voting, so it wasn't as bad as my off-the-cuff summary makes it sound, but the performance did sell the song tragically short. The following year, by way of Skopje Fest, they chose the charming and charismatic Daniel Kajmakowski and his up-tempo ballad Licia Esenski. After a compelling live presentation at Skopje Fest, followed by an enthusiastic media embargo preventing any potential leaks of what they were going to do with his song in anticipation of the contest, all seemed rather promising for their chances in Vienna. But the song we got, in the end, fell short of the mark again. Now, make no mistake, Autumn Leaves as a composition was still impressive. It was just a slight departure from the original is all. What really did it in for Daniel, though, was, once again, the choreography, the live presentation. He had 3 backing singer-dancers in the form of former members of Blackstreet, also credited as Merge, and by itself, there is nothing wrong with that absolutely whatsoever, but over the course of the song, nobody on stage did much more than gyrate in place and then slowly drift stage left. In other words, we had a soulful, emotional, R&B-inspired ballad in which the singer bore his soul, performed as if it were a cocksure boy band number brimming with self-confidence, and that just did not work. It's a song about opening yourself up and letting your emotions show, and they were presenting it like it was Belarus 2014. Accordingly, it placed 15th in its semi-final, which is a shame because the song was lovely and the ideas were very much there. Unfortunately, the presentation just didn't back it up. In 2017 and 2018, they ran into similar problems once again. Impressive and even groundbreaking pieces of music with thoroughly engaging studio presences, to such an extent that Dance Alone was my #1 favourite song of the 2017 contest, with lacking impact when they hit the stage. In the case of the former, I dare say they took the title a bit too literally, leaving Jana Borcheska entirely to herself to be swallowed up by the enormity of the stage, delivering a vocal performance that was so painfully close to being up to par, but that just didn't quite make the cut. And the year after, IQ were already starting from a slight disadvantage, simply because the gamble they had taken on their multi-genred song seemed not to have paid off with most viewers, confusing some of the audience with its cross between pop and reggae that switched off at regular intervals. On top of that, yet again, we had disappointing choreography, though their sassy gestures during the chorus were a marvellous exception to that, and underwhelming vocals. This time, all of that was capped off with costumes that would go on to win that year's Barbara Dex Award, which is given out each year to the worst dressed competitor at the contest, and only one of the last 5 winners of that actually made it to the final. Now, you might notice that I skipped over 2016. Well, that's because that was the return of Calliope, who earned her country a tantalising 11th place in the semi-final. I leave that example until now for one simple reason. The problems she faced are precisely the opposite of what held back the other 4 of the past 5 Macedonian entries. While the others had underwhelming vocals and mismatching choreography, Calliope delivered an absolute masterclass in how to sing live. No, really, did you hear that ending? Punctuated with understated choreography that may not have been very kinetic on stage, but save for one very distracting shot of the drummer, who honestly really did not need to be there, it matched the performance down to the ground. So why did that one not qualify? Well, while it got right what all the others got wrong, it also got wrong what all the others got right. I have no doubt in my mind that Donna could have easily won the contest as recently as the early 90s, and Calliope performed it flawlessly at the contest, but it simply was not the right genre for Eurovision 2016. So I believe that her 11th place finish came from appreciation of her vocal capabilities, as well as some nearby countries who still hold this genre of song dearly, but its timelessness held it back from doing much better than that. That being the case, we do have substantial evidence that FYR Macedonia does have the means at its disposal to send amazing Eurovision contenders that can hold their own against the competition. But repeatedly in recent years, they've put so much effort into some aspects of the performance that their neglect of the other aspects has kept them squarely within the semi-finals. So while I admire their determination to keep trying and trying again, their follies compel me to award them a rank D. But I want to stress that there is plenty of room for improvement that can make me raise that grade quite easily. They have the power within their grasp to get a much better grade, so just do it, Macedonia, I know you can! For one, I do want to express my sincere admiration for how the Macedonian team has been sticking with Eurovision through thick and thin, sending all manner of varied songs and trying everything they can. That goes for the junior contest as well, where, funnily enough, they fall into the same pitfalls. Great songs with some disappointing aspect to their live deliveries, whether that's shaky vocals, questionable dance routines, or simply leaving the lead singer a bit too alone on stage, forming a disconnect with the song. I believe the delegation is able to learn and apply what they've learned to take control of their Eurovision destiny, but I can't shift their rank until they start getting results that reflect that. So, while awarding them a D does make me feel bad, I know in my heart that that is just a temporary D. And once they get into the swing of finding acts that can deliver astounding live vocals on a contemporary, zeitgeist-appropriate song with carefully considered choreography, they will enter the golden age that they deserve. And who knows, maybe the past few years have all been experiments to exactly this end, just to get a feel for what those components look and sound like in isolation. Maybe the Republic is going to come out swinging in 2019 and bring it home to Skopje by the end of the decade. It's not impossible, and in fact, I believe they could do it if they did the right thing. And on that hopeful note, I shall sign off and leave you to ponder what might yet be. As ever, it just falls to me to give a sincere shout out to the lovely people powering these videos over on patreon.com/TessHex. Without their support, these videos simply would not happen, ever, and that is no word of exaggeration. And if you would like the satisfaction of being a part of that, you can join for as little as $1 per video, and in exchange you get a whole load of extra rewards that you wouldn't get just by watching on YouTube, including access to my work 1 month ahead of time with no ads, and access to the Patreon-exclusive Discord server. But I've plugged myself quite enough. For now, I have been and will continue to be Tessellating Hexagons, and I thank you most sincerely for watching, if you haven't clicked away already. See you in the next one.